welcome back to the DTVC Extra podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I know I had talked about maybe doing a Nicolas Cage episode or 2-episode series for the DTVC Extra, but what ended up happening was during the holiday weekend here in the States, I decided to finish off the remaining, I guess it was like 7 movies that I had or something like that, 6 movies for the Phase 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, kind of the end of the multiverse, or not the multiverse, the end of the Infinity War saga. And I thought, since I finished those off, why don't I do an episode on those? But I'm not going to do what I used to do, right? I'm not going to do like a 2 movie episodes, and that would be like 5 episodes for that. I'm just going to do one episode where the first half covers the first 6 movies. So between Captain America Civil War through to Black Panther, and then the second half covers the Infinity War films and the 3 movies that kind of come in that period, so the last 5 of that phase. So why don't we get stuck in here a bit. Now, one of the things for me, of course, as I was going through these is I hadn't watched many of them. I had seen, I think, the Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, and then the 2 Infinity War films. And I kind of saw them out of order as well. I don't know exactly why that was. I was trying to think about why that was. I mean, I know part of it was when these movies came out, especially, I wasn't really going to the theater much. I think I had gone to the theater in 2014 to see riff tracks, like a live riff tracks of Sharknado 2. So I saw that, and then I went in 2019 to see Lawrence of Arabia with my friend. And so in between that period, I didn't see any movies in the theater. So that was one part of it. Of course, at that time too, many of the companies didn't have streaming sites that they have now, right? So that's kind of a thing where, Disney Plus didn't exist. You really just had Netflix and Hulu. Those were kind of the 2 main games in town, and then you had like the free ones like Tubi. So it wasn't always as easy to get free versions to stream of these movies. So that was another piece of it. Of course, they're also longer. That's another part of it. So, how much do I want to do that? But I think also I was kind of over the Marvel thing a little bit, which is interesting to think too, because it's not like I had seen a lot of those Marvel movies before in the previous 2 phases either. I kind of came to a lot of them doing it for this podcast as well. But I think it was just sort of the fact that it was so prevalent in the zeitgeist that was a little bit of fatigue. I mean, I remember when Martin Scorsese came out against the Marvel movies, I was like, yeah, go get him, Marty. You take him down, And then, of course, when Samuel Jackson came to their defense, and I kind of got a sense that part of the reason why he came to the Marvel movies' defense is he was like, Mr. Scorsese, who only has me in one of his movies where I get shot in the back of the head in my underwear with a joke line about taking the coffee to go, whereas Marvel has me in all of these movies doing really big parts. And it's another fact that Samuel Jackson has made about the Quentin Tarantino movies, where his movies use the N-word a lot, and there's a lot of racism in his movies. But he's like, you notice when I'm in those movies, I'm usually the smartest character in the room, and I'm the lead in that way, and I don't always get those opportunities to play that kind of character. Well, he gets that opportunity in these Marvel movies, so I can see where he would defend them, because it's like they aren't maybe as they don't give the same opportunities. I mean, how many opportunities would Samuel Jackson have in Martin Scorsese's movies, right? I don't see a lot of opportunities in a lot of his films. They're much more white Italian in some cases, but they don't, they're not going to have Samuel Jackson in them, unfortunately. And so I can see where he would have defended those, But at the time, I was like, yeah, you go get him, Marty. I was trying to think beyond the zeitgeist part of it, why I wasn't a big fan. And I think some of it was just me coming from the comic books background. There were certain changes or decisions that were made that I wasn't a big fan of. I think the biggest one was Thanos, who we called Thanos because we didn't know how any of them were pronounced, so we called him Thanos, but I guess it's Thanos, so I guess it makes more sense. But I looked at him, and I didn't really like him. I thought he looked like some kind of distorted Grimace, which, of course, I think in the Infinity War movie, Star-Lord calls him Grimace as well. But it was also kind of a joke where it was like, I called him Grimace, but I also realized that it's not just that he's Grimace. He looks like Grimace's MAGA uncle, right? Because he's got like those rib things on his chin that look like a goatee, and he's got those beady eyes. And so, I mean, you could just like see his spaceship with a "these colors don't run" license plate on it, you know what I mean? And I'm sure there's a certain point where Grimace and the rest of the Grimace family have decided that MAGA Uncle Thanos, right? He's not invited to any family gatherings because it's just all Alex Jones conspiracy theories and crap like that, So probably a point where somebody in the family just lost it, right? Where, Uncle Thanos is giving all of those theories like, climate change, climate just always is changing. It's not anything to do with what man-made is doing, and somebody just loses it and like, listen, Uncle Thanos, you've got hundreds of climate scientists putting out peer-reviewed articles that are peer-reviewed by hundreds of other climate scientists. Don't you think the first thing they would have ruled out is that the climate just naturally changes on its own? Wouldn't that have been the first thing? But no, Uncle Thanos, you figured it out. You solved the problem, and so just go ride your Dodge F4 or your Ford F450 and keep polluting the earth. That's it. And everybody kind of looks, at that. So there's like a little bit of a tense moment, but people are kind of smirking too, like, yeah, you really gave it to Uncle Thanos there. And then at that point, Uncle Thanos is like contacting family members, like, so where are we having Thanksgiving this year? Sorry, Uncle Thanos, no, that's not. You can even hear in his voice, he sounds like a MAGA uncle, right? Grimace. That illegal immigrants are taking all of our jobs. It's like, no, Uncle Thanos, that's not how that works. You don't get it. So maybe that's part of it too, right? Is that, and especially 2016, 2017, I mean, seeing, the main villain in a comic book series look like that collage of MAGA head, face, like profile shots, right, where they all have the Ray-Bans and the goatees, and they're all taking the picture from their car. Can you imagine, like, Uncle Thanos, right, taking that picture from his spaceship, with his Ray-Bans, kind of holding it there. Maybe he's got the seatbelt across him, And then there's a point where Grimace's sister or cousin or somebody who still keeps in touch with Uncle Thanos, still hasn't blocked him on Facebook yet, right, is reaching out and is like, yeah, so Uncle Thanos was searching for porn in his Facebook comment box today. So he actually was searching for porn on a post that I made about my trip to Italy. So yeah, really embarrassing, So that's our villain, right? That's our main villain is somebody's MAGA uncle with his "these colors don't run" license plate on the front of his spaceship. So that was another reason I think why I wasn't as keen on these movies either. So yeah, I guess that's kind of it. As we kind of get in and look at these, I did have a bit of a change of heart watching them all the way through. But why don't we kind of get stuck in? Now that we kind of given the background for me, let's now give the background on where we're at in 2016 before Captain America: Civil War, the first movie in this new phase, comes out. So we left off last time with Ant-Man coming out in late 2015, and in between when Ant-Man's released and Captain America: Civil War come out, three important things, I think, or at least important for me to bring up, happen in that period. First is Disney's first Star Wars film, Force Awakens, comes out and promptly earns $2 billion. And I think this is big because for Disney, this is another franchise for them that can pull $1 billion, and in this case, a $2 billion earner can be that big. So now you're looking at it, you've got the Marvel films, you've got now Star Wars, you've got Pixar, and then you've got their own sort of Disney, their own, I guess, Disney studios, you'd say, like where you can do like, the live action versions of cartoons or just cartoons, right? Like a Moana or a Frozen. So they've got all four of these pieces here. And I used to talk about in the past how they could use their might to strangle movies out, right? That they could essentially put all these movies out and sort of strangle a big release from one of the other studios so that like maybe they don't get as many theaters as they want, and that kind of thing. And I think they can also do it strategically to kill momentum, right? They can, and we're going to talk about that a little bit with these Fox movies that come out at the same time, that they can strategically place their movies in ways that maybe they can put one that comes out before one of the big movie for that year for the other studio, so it hurts the initial momentum. But then as it starts to build momentum, they can put another movie out at the end that sort of clips it as the momentum's building. And then they can trim a good $250 million off of a take for a certain film and really hurt it. And with Disney having so many movies at the same time coming out, that they can afford to have a movie make maybe $750 million and take $250 billion away from their competitor, while they've got another one that's kind of surging forward and earning over $1 billion. So it's a very cutthroat approach. I feel like Fox is the one that they really pick on because I think they targeted Fox for the acquisitions they ended up making. I think as far back as 2016, they were already targeting them for that acquisition, and they were looking for ways to diminish them so they could kind of get a good price if they were going to acquire 20th Century Fox there. So that's one piece of it. But I think the other piece of it is almost like a Tour de France team approach, where you've got all of these movies that you can use strategically throughout the year to sort of, gain momentum so that one particular one stands out and does the most money. So for example, I think with the Star Wars movie, I think part of the reason why the Ant-Man movie doesn't do as well, and also that Avengers movie that year didn't do as well either, is that they could start to pivot and start moving things to push towards the Star Wars movie, push more resources to getting that Star Wars movie to do well. But they could use the Avengers movie and the Ant-Man movie to kind of build that momentum to get people to the theater to go see them. I think the other thing they talked about with that Avengers Age of Ultron movie was that they were already starting to talk about the movies from this coming third phase. And I think Kevin Feige, I think is how you say his name. I looked it up on Wikipedia. Kevin Feige said that he felt like the talk of the upcoming third phase Avengers movies may have hurt the I don't say the momentum, but it may have hurt the box office and sort of the buzz around that Age of Ultron one. So that kind of might have affected it as well. But it's their ability to do that kind of thing, to be able to position pieces in that way. The other thing that they were looking to do at this time, and I think acquiring 20th Century Fox like they do eventually, is they could vault more movies that are kind of more lower end. So for example, something like a Say Anything, that's a movie that 20th Century Fox owns, and indie theaters would like to show a Say Anything maybe on an anniversary or just like a John Cusack night or something like that, to get people to come in the door and want to go see more movies there. I mean, I can say from my own experience, I saw Blade at the local indie theater, the Ritz in Philadelphia. And my plan was, when I had to see Nosferatu for the Lambcast episode that I was on, I wanted to see it there. The only reason why I couldn't and I had to go to the AMC was because AMC was the only one that offered a 9:30 a.m. Viewing, so I could get the movie out of the way earlier and do whatever else I had to do for the rest of my day. But what Disney was doing with this approach with the vaulting is they could tell indie theaters, no, you can't have a Say Anything or any of these kinds of movies that would get more people in the door, because they want to kind of crush those indie theaters, because they have more control over this approach, the strategic ability to plant movies when they need to crush their competition. They have more ability to do that if there's just like what was it, Regal, AMC, and Cinemark, I think are the main ones. If they've just got a few conglomerates that they can work with, it's a lot easier for them to do that. So Star Wars, this Force Awakens movie, I think really, really comes in here and informs Disney's approach. But the other thing, the way that this may affect the Marvel movies, is that when you look at these franchises, the only one that can really pump out multiple movies a year on the scale that Disney would want is the Marvel one, right? I mean, some years you can get 2 Pixar films, or some years you can get two Disney Studios films, maybe 2, in no years really do we see 2 Star Wars movies. But with Marvel, at the time they were doing 2 a year. They start bumping up to 3 a year as well. So this is where the strategy really starts to turn, and this really informs, I think, through 2016 through to when the pandemic starts, really informs Disney's approach and how they're going to sort of crush their competition. And again, I think Fox is the one that they target the most for this. Okay, so that's thing 1. Thing 2 has to do with Fox. We kind of come back to Fox. Fox has 3 movies come out, 2 between Ant-Man and Captain America Civil War, and then a third one that comes out 3 weeks after. So you've got the Fantastic Four movie first. They had big plans for that movie, and of course it tanks. It tanks spectacularly, right? It's so sauteed in wrong sauce, and it's one of the ultimate movie busts of all time. I do feel bad, like Miles Teller, they interviewed him recently because there's that new Fantastic Four movie coming out this year, and he was like, yeah, I hope theirs has more success than ours did, right? Unfortunately, the actors and the crew involved, they kind of have to deal with this reality of these busts. But yeah, it doesn't work, right? And then you get Deadpool early in the year of 2016. Huge hit for them, right? And only a $60 million budget, but yet it is one of their most successful. I think it's up there. It's either that one and number 2 are their most successful movies during this sort of X-Men Fantastic Four run that they have here with Fox. And it also shows kind of how, yes, to some extent they were getting kind of getting assaulted by Disney, and that hurt their ability to kind of move or to get to get box office gross. But on the other hand, they also didn't make the right decisions with this. I think they were falling to that same trap of there's a cap for an R-rated movie, that you can only go so far. And to be honest, at that time, that was the highest grossing domestic R-rated film, I think, ever. Now, worldwide gross, right, it wasn't quite there. But I think from a sheer number standpoint, that was the highest domestic gross for an R-rated film, was that Deadpool movie. And, it's $750 million, but if you're looking at what Marvel's doing with the Avengers films, you're looking at Batman with The Dark Knight, and you're seeing that that's where your ceiling is, you're thinking, I need something more than that. But what's interesting is they didn't look at that success with Deadpool and think, well, what if we use Deadpool along with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine to build some of these other X products? And they never do, right? They always keep Deadpool sectioned off. They even kind of joke about it in that the second Deadpool movie where he's in the X-Men mansion and he sees the X-Men doing something in another room and they close the door on him, right? It's almost like, Ryan Reynolds is making this joke about like, yeah, why can't I be a part of all that? And of course, they don't do that. But that was a big earner for them. And then they get the X-Men Apocalypse movie, which that should have been their big earner. And not only does it not do as well, right? I think if you put it does about $500 million, but if you put that, so of course that's less than the Deadpool one, but also if you put it together with the Fantastic Four movie, Deadpool still earns more than both of those together. And from a budget standpoint, it's about a fifth of the budget of those two because this is like 180 billion, or sorry, 180 million roughly for this one, and then the Fantastic Four one was like 120 million. So essentially, they just took $300 million, and I don't say they lit it on fire because they still got $500 million out of that X-Men movie, but the return on investment was not what they were looking for, especially when you factor in what happened with Deadpool. But I think also you're seeing some of Disney's strategy at play here in how they were able to hurt that X-Men Apocalypse movie. So yes, some of it was Fox's own fault because the X-Men Apocalypse movie was not as great as it should be. But I don't think that it fully explains the bad numbers there. I think the other piece is that Captain America Civil War comes out 3 weeks before. So it's really hard to sort of get momentum on that X-Men Apocalypse movie when, this Captain America Civil War film is still really generating a lot of buzz and still doing really well in the theater after only 3 weeks. So there's that. I think they released the Alice in Wonderland live action film with Johnny Depp. I think they released that the same weekend as X-Men Apocalypse. So now you've got another Disney film there. And then Finding Dory comes out, I want to say like early mid-June. So their Pixar film, which was based off a huge earner with the Finding Nemo, which was that was a huge cultural phenomenon. So to have a sequel there, Finding Dory, come out at that same time, they really hemmed that movie in, and it in a way they should have been happy with 500 billion because it was going to be tough for them to really manage that. Now, granted, there are some franchises that can mitigate that kind of thing. I mean, if that had been a Fast and Furious movie that you plunked down in there, Dom and company, they would have crushed all of those, right? They would have carved out their billion somehow out of everybody else, and Captain America: Winter Soldier, Civil War maybe doesn't earn as much, right? Maybe those other ones don't earn as much because Fast and Furious is carving that out. That's what makes that franchise so special, is that it could mitigate this kind of thing. But with Fox still making bad decisions and then also getting this approach, that definitely hurt them. The other thing is that Disney at that time, they buy Marvel in like 2013, and they had been proactively within the comics trying to dismantle all of the work that Chris Claremont did in the 80s to build the X-Men and make it one of the biggest franchises within the Marvel Comics universe. They were diminishing the X-Men and trying to raise the profile of the Avengers within the comic books because they didn't want to do Fox any favors. So that also was hurting them. But again, if you're Fox, you've got to look at who is Disney-proof out of that. And the two ones that were Disney-proof were Wolverine and Deadpool. I remember at the time I started playing this video game, Marvel Puzzle Quest, that I still play now. So all the Marvel characters, the Match 3 game with Marvel characters. And I started playing it in 2014, 2015, around that era. And at that time, I think Disney had put out an edict to the company that was making the game, no more X characters. And so there was this large period of time where we weren't getting any X characters in the game. Also not a lot of Spider-Man characters either. It was mostly like Avengers characters. I mean, there's like, 5 different Hawkeyes in the game, all different ones like that. But Deadpool was one of the ones that they couldn't touch, and same with Wolverine. They had to keep those guys in the game. They had to keep them prominent in the game because they were so popular. And I think Fox could have looked at that. Obviously Logan comes out the year after this, does really well, but Deadpool was the one. And I think they should have started incorporating Deadpool more. I think that would have helped them. But they had this fear of the whole R-rated thing, and they just didn't want to go there. So, that's what happens. Now, the third piece of this that I want to get into before we get into the movies themselves, that is Batman versus Superman, or Superman versus Batman, Dawn of Justice, right? That comes out in early 2016 as well. And that is really DC's entree into this. So DC, we've talked about this on previous episodes. They do really well with The Dark Knight. That's their billion-dollar earner, and they think, okay, we can kind of keep working this strategy of just a Batman movie or Batman, series here, a Superman series here, and then they see where the Marvel Cinematic Universe has passed them and realize like, oh no, we've got to start joining our characters together. I think they kind of rushed this Batman versus Superman thing because if you look at the way Marvel was doing it with Kevin Feige, where you're developing these characters individually in their movies, and then eventually you bring them all together at once, as opposed to just bringing them all together, in the second movie. It would be almost like this Captain America Civil War film if that was the second movie, if that came after Iron Man. It wouldn't work, right? It wouldn't have worked the same way. You need to build these characters up so it's kind of fun to see them all together like that. I think they also could have probably included the Joker in that, but all of that aside, the movie does well enough, but I think part of the reason why it doesn't quite hit that $1 billion number, beyond some of those issues that I talked about there, where it didn't, they didn't build the characters up enough. I think there was enough name recognition to begin with those characters. I mean, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, those are their three biggest ones, and if you're putting them all in a movie together, that should be enough to really generate that kind of buzz. But I think Deadpool does cut into some of that number. Deadpool comes in, kind of towards the tail end of that run when they still would have been tacking on money worldwide and still kind of generating a buzz. But I think Deadpool comes in and takes some of that money away. And I think to Marvel's credit, Marvel Cinematic Universe, they were a little bit lucky there that Deadpool wasn't kind of in and around, Captain America Civil War. Again, had Fox been a little bit more strategic about it, but they didn't see Deadpool as that kind of gold that they should have. But again, this is DC trying to get into the game as well. They're trying to play catch up now. For years, they were way ahead of Marvel when it came to comic book movies. Now they're trying to play catch up, and you really see it here with this Batman and Superman movie that and it kind of felt like a catch up movie, right? It felt like they were trying to do what the Avengers did, and they weren't really quite pulling it off, I don't think. When I watched the movie, it's not exactly the movie I would have wanted for those three teaming up. I think, I don't know. That's just me, but and maybe that's also it's so partly Deadpool kind of hurting their killing their thunder. I think the other thing too is that what we'll see in the next section of this episode, we'll see that the Marvel momentum from the Infinity War movies is kind of it's this rising tide that raises all boats, and DC is one of those boats that gets raised. But at this point, they're not quite there yet. Marvel hasn't have quite that ability to make even DC projects get more at the box office, but that eventually comes. So we're setting the stage here, and now it's time. We're into Captain America: Civil War here, and again. I don't want to say that Marvel was coming on a low note the previous year. I think it's just that Avengers movie, Age of Ultron, you would have wanted that to do better than the previous Avengers movie, and it doesn't. So I think that's part of the issue. And again, that Ant-Man movie doesn't do as well maybe as they would have wanted to. It in a way, it kind of feels like an afterthought. Later, seeing these movies, you can see how it's more of a bridge, especially when we get to Captain America: Civil War. But I think there was a sense that Captain America: Civil War needed to be a big one. And one of the interesting things going into this phase and going into this film, when they laid out what the movies were going to be, they didn't know, they hadn't made it official yet that they were bringing Spider-Man into the fold. That ends up getting leaked when there's it's now North Korea's Sony hack happens, right? And then you find out that there were talks between Sony and Marvel about making this happen. But I remember when the movie was released or it was coming out and we were seeing the commercials and you see Spider-Man in the commercials along with Black Panther. I will say the Spider-Man was a little bit, he left a little bit to be desired when I was seeing him in the commercials. Like, oh, this is interesting. I don't know what this could be. I think it was enough of a buzz that you had those two characters in particular, Spider-Man and Black Panther, and they were showing them as being prominent in the film. That would get enough buzz to get people in the door. Now, what makes this movie work to that point where it is the Captain America $1 billion earner and the one that sort of reasserts that Marvel's on the right path, that Kevin Feige's on the right path with this Marvel Cinematic Universe? I think it's this idea that they sort of take what was wrong about the second Avengers movie with Age of Ultron, where that movie was almost like the novelty of bringing all the characters together was gone a little bit, and also the novelty of them bickering but then coming together and fighting some baddie. That novelty was gone a little bit, so they needed to take it to another level, and using the Civil War storyline was a really great way to do that. Now that was from the comics, that it did happen there, but the way it comes out in the movie, you've got essentially Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man is the baddie in the film, which I thought was a fantastic idea. And not only is he a baddie, but he's not a baddie who's being influenced in some way, like it's not like say Fate of the Furious, right, where Charlize Theron's holding something over Dom Toretto's head, and so that's why he's the baddie, because they're keeping his kid and his ex-wife hostage. That's not happening. Nothing's being kept hostage. Nobody's, he's not being forced to do this for that reason. There's no kind of like mind control device. Loki didn't cast a spell on him or something like that. This is all of his own volition that he's being the baddie. And then Don Cheadle's a great heel underneath him. He's a fantastic heel. He's always had that heel sense to him in the previous Iron Man films. He eventually will come around, but he can be a heel at moments. He's got that kind of military character heel. And I think Don Cheadle plays that really, really well there. And I think it works perfectly underneath Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man baddie. Yes, eventually there's a point where he becomes redeemable towards the end, but it really sets the stage for what I think, when they decided to cast him as Dr. Doom, it really, this kind of sets the stage for that, where they can look at it and say, like, yeah, Robert Downey Jr. plays a really good baddie. This is fantastic here. And that dynamic worked so well. I liked how that functioned in the film. It really breathed some new life into the film and into the series, not just with the new characters. The way they used Black Panther was great, though. I really liked that. Introducing Spider-Man the way they did, and almost they're introducing him in a way where it's like, we're going to keep Iron Man and Captain America as the focal points of this MCU, but then the plan is to eventually, right, maybe turn this thing over to Spider-Man because he's so big, right? Eventually, Spider-Man's going to take this over. I do think there was probably some reluctance on Marvel's part to really have Spider-Man take over for Iron Man and Captain America, because he is still co-owned. The rights are still co-owned by Sony, so I can see how maybe he wouldn't want to do that completely. But overall, I think it works here. They introduced Spider-Man well. They introduced Black Panther well, and I also kind of like watching as these characters come around. So Black Widow slowly comes around to Captain America's side. Black Panther comes around. Eventually they all kind of realize, and even Iron Man, right? He realizes he's been a jerk the whole time. But yeah, so I think it's a really good way for them to come back. I really enjoyed this one. I think when I'm ranking the Captain America movies, I would still put this one third. I still think Winter Soldier and First Avenger for me are better than this one, or I at least enjoyed them more than this one. But no, this one definitely works. And I think, I can't remember if it was Freddie or Mitch who said that this is essentially another Avengers movie. And in a way, this does also kind of set the stage for that two-part Avengers thing that we're going to get later on in this episode here, later on in this phase of films. Because it is, in a way, it's almost kind of like Age of Ultron Part 2, the way that they do this. And, again, I think it works really well. And it's a really great way for them to sort of reestablish, if there's any bit of a lull coming off of the previous year, they do a really great job of reestablishing themselves here, and they give you something here that definitely works. So that's Captain America Civil War. Part of the reason why I didn't want to do two movie episodes for this entire phase, beyond the fact that I think 5 episodes would have been pretty onerous for everybody listening, but also, like, for example, Doctor Strange. I don't know how much more I could say about Doctor Strange. I don't think I could fill 20 minutes on Doctor Strange. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, same thing. They both are good movies. They both do well enough. The one thing I would say about both of them, Doctor Strange and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, is that they feel like, if you think of like the early 2000s initial Marvel movie boom, they're the kind of movies that would have, they would have had their own thing. They would have been, their own studio, or, whatever studio would have had the rights to them. They would have been their own thing. And definitely Doctor Strange really feels like that kind of movie, because it's not until like we get a bonus scene at the end that we really get to see Doctor Strange with with any of the other characters. But you could see this kind of this arc where you get like a first movie that's really good, maybe earns like $300 million in 2002, a sequel that's a little bit better, pulls in around the same number, 330, something like that, but it's a little bit better, adds a few more characters in, and then a bonkers third one that's just so sauteed in wrong sauce that it kills the whole thing, right? That's kind of where you see that. And then, of course, that third one that was bonkers and sauteed in wrong sauce and killed the whole thing, 20 years later, whatever hacky, clickbaity review site or whatever, like whatever hacky, clickbaity, YouTube channel or whatever, when they're counting down their worst Marvel movies of all time, there's Doctor Strange 3, in that collection. That's kind of what you got there. And I kind of felt like this Doctor Strange movie, it felt like that. It felt like your standard, like, early 2000s. Yes, the effects were better, but it felt like kind of your standard early 2000s, section of Marvel movies kind of thing. And I think Guardians of the Galaxy felt the same way. I think it felt like it's a fun enough movie. It's the kind of movie that was solid enough to get you to a third Guardians of the Galaxy in the early 2000s. All of that stuff is good there. Where these are superior to those early 2000s movies is, again, the fact that they're inserted into and complete with all this other Marvel stuff that they have access to. So it's like you take those early 2000s movies that are good enough, the ones that are good enough, and you now suddenly open up this whole world of Marvel to them where they're included in all this stuff. So now it's like, okay, I see this first Doctor Strange movie and it's good enough, right, in 2003, but it's like, if it's good enough in 2003, but I know that Doctor Strange is going to be in a Spider-Man movie, and I know that Doctor Strange is going to be in, an X-Men movie or whatever, right? Knowing that all these things were together, I think that's what makes it really great here, is that there's this anticipatory part of it where it's like, oh, where are we going to see Doctor Strange next in all of this? Guardians of the Galaxy, I think for me, watching that one, I wasn't as enamored with the early parts of it, but it's sort of this classic Marvel approach where the early parts of the movies tend to be a lot of just rote, sort of, I don't want to say tropey, but it's very standard, right? It's like essentially like, you go to screenwriting school and they're following the models of like the ups and downs, and this is supposed to happen in this actor, whatever. And I'm watching, I'm kind of like, this is really paint by numbers. I don't know how much I can sit through this. But then as the movie goes on, I start to really get invested in these characters. And when the end thing happens and they're all there as this big team sort of, taking down the baddie, I'm like all in and I love it. And it's one of those things too where it's like that last 30 minutes of the Marvel movie a lot of times makes me forget the first hour and a half where I was kind of iffy on it. It's kind of like when I take a bus somewhere, like an inner city bus, like a Greyhound, and like during the trip I'm like, this is like the worst thing ever, I'm never going to do this again. But then I get home and I'm happy to be home, and I kind of forget how bad that trip was when I start booking. Like a year or two later I start booking, and go to get another trip. It's kind of a similar thing, and I think it's a good way to make a movie in the sense, like, if you want to sell, right? If you want to sell a lot of tickets, is you want the end to be the best part because you want to be able to sell it to people later. And yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy really fits that one for me, for sure. So, again, another solid outing there, but, again, we can kind of keep still seeing that we're building something here. So now we've got the last three from this first group that I'll be talking about. We've got the Spider-Man movie, Thor Ragnarok, and then Black Panther. So Spider-Man Homecoming, what I liked about it was, one, we don't have the origin story. I think they kind of cut that part out. They kind of just know that we've seen Spider-Man's origin story so many times before that it's just like, let's just get right into it. I love that he's more of a high school student than the other ones. It's like the other ones, he's set in high school, but he's not really a high school student. He's like an adult. It's like, it's like Luke Perry in 90210, right? Like living in his own hotel and driving cars around and, surfing and doing all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like that's what Spider-Man is in those movies. Whereas in this, he's like really a high school kid. He's really dealing with high school stuff, which I like that as well. I like that they made Queens a character in this movie. They've never really, they make New York a character in the other movies, but this one made Queens a character, and I really appreciated that approach as well. I like the inclusion of Iron Man. I mean, that's another thing that really sets this one apart from the other ones, is that you've got Iron Man in it, and so now we're still developing this storyline that essentially Spider-Man's going to take over for Iron Man at the end of this phase. That's the plan, and we're starting to set the stage for that now, which I liked. And then I think out of all the Spider-Man villains, I mean, Michael Keaton's Vulture might be one of my favorites. I mean, I love there's that sequence where Michael Keaton is taking his daughter, who is seeing Peter Parker, seeing Tom Holland. He's taking them to their dance and he's dropping them off, and he's figured out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and he starts calling him Pete. He's like, all right, Pete, let's get down to brass tacks here. And, they're going, it's just fantastic. I really love that part of it as well. So, I don't know where I would rank it with the other Spider-Man films, especially that first three, the Sam Raimi ones. I don't know if I put this above any of those three, but I think for a Marvel Cinematic Universe entry with Spider-Man, this one really worked for sure. Now, Thor Ragnarok, I definitely have some bones to pick with this one. And this one seems to be, I think, out of this phase, I think more than any of them, this is the one that people pick as their favorite. People really love Thor Ragnarok. For me, this is the one that I actually saw first out of any of these Phase 3 movies, because I saw the commercials and I was like, oh, I like the idea of it, like a take on like 70s space exploitation movies. Like, oh, let's do that. Let's go all in on that. And then when I watched it, I saw, oh, it's the same old, standard Marvel fare. It's like got some kind of like a almost like 70s exploitation look to it, but not really. But from a story standpoint, it's not 70s exploitation story, right? This is not like, Star Slammer or something like that, it doesn't fit that, unfortunately. And so I was disappointed with that. But the other thing that disappointed me was we had what I thought was Chekhov's pretending to be caught so he could infiltrate the baddie, right? Because in the very first scene, or early scene, we see Thor. He's caught by this baddie. He's like in some net or something, and then we find out that no, he was feigning his well, I don't know what the word I want to use there. He was feigning that he was caught, but really he wasn't caught. He was allowed himself to be caught so he could infiltrate the baddie and take him down. So when Thor ends up on the trash planet and he's like getting zapped and he's like putting these like electric chain kind of things that are like restraining him, I thought he was just pretending because he's the god of thunder, right? He should just be pretending. And then when Valkyrie like puts the thing on his neck that like zaps him, again, I thought he was just pretending. I thought he was just pretending so he could infiltrate this whole thing, figure out what was going on, and take everybody down. But when you find out that he wasn't just pretending, that he actually was captured, it's like, wait, the God of Thunder can just be captured by like electric chain kind of things? Like that's all it takes? You can just zap him on a trash planet and that's all it takes to take him down? Like that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I get it that I'm watching comic book movies here. I'm watching a movie where the God of Thunder is traveling to another planet and fighting a big green gamma monster guy. And I'm questioning, realities there. But I think you have to follow certain rules. I think if you need to establish rules and follow those rules. And if one of the rules is that your hero is the God of Thunder, it should take more than these little zap things to bring him down, because I don't really believe it when he's doing other stuff later. Of course he gets his ass kicked by Thanos, I mean, and granted, he probably should have done a better job arguing his point about why universal healthcare is good at the dinner table with Uncle Thanos. But the point is, I can see him getting his ass kicked. He's not that powerful, right? He's not the God of Thunder. He's Mr. Gets Zapped and stuff. So I had some issues with that for sure. But then again, it does exactly what Guardians of the Galaxy 2 does, where it's like, oh, we got this cool team up of Hulk and Valkyrie and Thor, and they're going to take down Hela, played by Cate Blanchett, who I believe is the first female supervillain in a Marvel movie since Jessica Walters was a female supervillain in the Doctor Strange TV movie. So she would be the first in a feature film, in a Marvel feature film. So that was a really cool thing to have that in there. So I like that as well. I liked her as a baddie. She was really fantastic. And I love the team up when they go to fight her. And so again, I'm in this stage where I'm like watching the first hour and a half and I'm like, okay, get over yourself. Great. Jeff Goldblum's funny. Yeah, that's great. He's melting people. That's really funny stuff. Thor's caught again. Thor's getting zapped again. Thor's trying to get out of the way and he's getting zapped again. Poor Thor. I'm kind of just like over it at that point. But then I get to this end and I'm like, oh no, this is a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying this. And so, again, the Thor movie, I think I could take the first hour and a half and be like, yeah, this is like maybe a C tier movie. But then I get to the end and I'm like, no, this is a B. I really like this movie, or maybe even an A tier. I had a lot of fun with it. So that's kind of my thing on that. And I don't begrudge anybody who sees this as a 4 or 5 star movie. This is, and I say, think of Letterboxd as 4 or 5 stars. I don't begrudge anybody for feeling that way. I had my own bones to pick with it, for sure. Now, finally, we kind of end this section here with Black Panther here in 2018. This might be, I don't know if it's my favorite of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. It's right up there. I mean, it's like this and Winter Soldier and the Captain Marvel movie we'll talk about in a second here. But I absolutely love this movie. I think the characters are fantastic. Chadwick Boseman is just amazing as Black Panther. I love Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. He was really fantastic. I love the dynamic between those two. I love the dynamic between Wakanda and the rest of the world. The dynamic between Wakanda and the African American world or Black world, some of the issues that the world are facing. I love the dynamic between this idea of, like here, in America, you see it a lot. For example, if you've got like Black athletes who come out of, really impoverished areas and they're really rich and they don't know what to do because you can't just save everybody, right? You can't just help everybody who's in these really bad situations. And Wakanda's in that same situation of like, well, we can't help everybody, so we're just gonna get our mansion. Wakanda's essentially the mansion, right? We're just gonna live in this mansion, hid away from everybody, and just live with our wealth. But then there's a sense of like, oh, maybe that's not the right thing to do. All of it plays out so well. All of it works. This is just one of my all-time favorites. It deserved to make as much money as it made. I think to some extent, this movie, as much as the anticipation for an Avengers Infinity War probably helped this movie make as much money, because it comes out about 2 months, maybe 2.5 months before Infinity War, I think as much as it helped this movie make money with fans, I think on the other end, I think Black Panther helped build anticipation for Infinity War. I think Thor Ragnarok also did the same. I think those two movies together really, really build that momentum as we get into April 2018 and Infinity War happens. So, I can't say enough. I can't say enough about Black Panther. I absolutely love this movie, and I watched it again because it was I think the second I had seen out of these movies when I saw it originally. So I saw it like 2020, something like that. It was, I saw it on demand or something, and I instantly loved it, and then I just watched it again and loved it even more, which doesn't always happen. I'll talk about this when I get to the the Avengers movies. You don't always love movies more after the fact, but this one, yeah, I just, again, it's one of my favorites. So if you haven't seen Black Panther in a while, I think it's worth checking out. It's definitely a great movie there. I haven't seen the sequel yet. I haven't seen Wakanda Forever, so I need to get there at some point and watch that as well. I know it didn't do quite as well as Black Panther did. I think partly because that momentum had died down a bit. I think also Chadwick Boseman, he's kind of in that Christopher Reeve category of, it's hard to replace him. It's going to be hard to have somebody else play Black Panther. And the thing is, he did it in one movie, whereas I think Christopher Reeves, it was more two. Yes, you could say the third one as well, and I guess they filmed those two movies at the same time. And you can make the case. I think once Christopher Reeves does Superman, you don't want really anybody else playing Superman. I think that's the thing too. Chadwick Boseman did it in one movie. He became all right. Yes, two movies, right? Because he was Black Panther and Captain America: Civil War as well. So you give him two movies for that. But either way, he establishes that so well that it's going to be hard to use to find somebody else to play Black Panther. I think that's probably why they had the Shuri character play. I think she ends up becoming Black Panther at the end of Wakanda Forever. I think that's a smart move because you kind of just take that out of it, of just having a new actor playing the part. You can kind of just have somebody, have it be his sister who's taking on the mantle, and she doesn't necessarily have as much to live up to as just bringing somebody new in. I think Aldous Hodge might be somebody they were thinking about for Black Panther. But I can't say enough about this movie. So anyway, why don't we take a break here, and then when we come back, we'll finish off with the last 5 movies of this phase. So the 2 Avengers movies, and then Captain Marvel, what do we got? Ant-Man and Wasp, and the Spider movie. So we'll take a break here, and then we'll be right back. Check out my newest release, Nadia and Aiden, available now. Told in a unique, dual first-person narration style, Nadia and Aiden explores what it means to be American from the standpoint of 2 kids who grew up in France with an American mother. It also looks at how we define family beyond DNA and blood relations, when life isn't always that simple. You can find Nadia and Aiden on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and Kindle Unlimited. The link is in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and we're going to get stuck in on those last 5 movies of MCU Phase 3. We're going to start with Avengers Infinity War. So, we'll go back to, I guess it's April of 2018. Yours truly was turning 39 at that point, so definitely feels... I don't know if it feels a long time ago, right? Because I'm going to be 46 this year, but it definitely feels like that's 39 feels like a long time ago, even though that 2018 doesn't feel like that long ago, if that makes sense. But anyway, we're only a little bit more than 2 months removed from Black Panther. And so now we've got essentially one of the biggest cinematic phenomena to happen ever, right, with Avengers Infinity War. This movie is that big. It grosses over $2 billion. I, of course, was... I don't say over it. I was above it. It's probably a better way to look at it. I was like, I'm not going to see that Avengers movie. Whatever, y'all can see that. It didn't really have much for me in it. I did eventually see it, as I mentioned, and at that point, I'd only seen 3 of the movies before it: Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, and Captain Marvel. And I think total for MCU movies, I had probably seen like another 3 or 4 on top of that. So out of the whatever it was. Not 20, but like 15 to 18 movies. I had, seen maybe a third of them or something like that, or half of them. So there were a lot of movies I hadn't seen. And I just went in and watched it anyway. And I think one of the things I would say watching it this new time around is that I got the interactions between the characters better. I understood things better. Of course, I'm going into this movie not having seen a Captain America Civil War, for example, when I first saw it. So I had no idea that there was animosity between Iron Man and Captain America. I could kind of figure it out, but not a lot of that stuff didn't make a lot of sense to me. So, but I kind of just went with it, right? I just enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed, even then watching it, I enjoyed the interactions between the different groupings of characters that they put together. For example, I had a lot of fun with Robert Downey Jr. giving Star-Lord a hard time. That was really fun. I mean, I just love the part when Star-Lord starts talking and they realize that he's he's from Earth, and they're like, you're from Earth. He's like, I'm from Missouri, and he's like, yes, that's Earth. It's just that all that kind of stuff is kind of fun. So I enjoyed that. So those parts of it did work. I think there was a little bit of the painting themselves in the corner because they made Thanos too powerful. Again, for people out there who have dealt with, I've been fortunate. I don't really have MAGA relatives, and what my family is kind of more. Our nuclear family is a little bit more insulated, where we don't do as much with our outside of the nuclear family. So I haven't had as many interactions with the ones who might be MAGA. And my wife is similar. She doesn't have MAGA family members either. So we haven't had to really deal with the MAGA uncle that you don't want to invite to Thanksgiving. But yeah, I mean, that's really how you deal with him, right? Is you just stop engaging with Thanos on Facebook. You don't invite him to family events, and you just say, listen, go ahead, live out on your ranch or whatever with your Trump flags and your these colors don't run bumper sticker or whatever, and your bald eagle shirts, and just do your thing. That's you, Uncle Thanos. But instead, they've got to fight him because Uncle Thanos is coming for them. I guess that's the thing. I guess it would be like if Uncle Thanos didn't take no for an answer, right? If he just kept showing up at family events, and you're like, man, what do we do about this Uncle Thanos? That's what he's doing. He's causing all these problems. But I mean, when he beats the crap out of Hulk in the first scene, it is a little bit like, oh, okay, well, how are we supposed to defeat this guy if Hulk can get beaten up by him? And I think that was probably a mistake. I think Hulk should be able to handle his, handle his business with Thanos a little bit better than what they showed there. But anyway, seeing it the second time, I think the other thing I realized is, when I watched the Marvels, and everybody was saying, well, there's too much homework that you have to do to see the Marvels. And I saw it without having seen a lot of those previous things. I hadn't seen WandaVision. I hadn't seen Ms. Marvel. I hadn't seen a lot of those things. And I enjoyed it. I still had a fun time. I can see how people who have been rocking with this MCU thing all along, who, if they were behind on stuff, they weren't going to go see the Marvels, right? They were going to take a break and catch it when it was on Disney Plus after they'd caught up with everything. Because in their mind, it's like, I'm not going to get the full effect of this if I don't watch it all. And I could see it here, right? I'm trying to think. I guess at this point, we'd covered 6 movies in this phase, and then 6 each in the previous one. So 18 movies to this point. That if I hadn't seen the previous 18 movies of this, I'm not getting the full effect of number 19 here. And I think that is a concern when you're building this thing out. It's an amazing thing to do, to be able to build out this multiple movie arc to this stage, to be able to get something where you're finishing it off the way you want to with these last 5 movies. But it is also another piece of it that and it's interesting that they looked at it the other way. That instead of looking at it and saying like, wow, to really get the full effect of this movie, you would have had to see the previous 18. That's a lot to ask of somebody, to watch 18 movies to come into the 19th one. They looked at it the other way and said, no, we're going to add more content the next time around. We're going to not just have movies. We're going to have 7 movies in the phase, plus another, 7 or 8 TV shows that you've got to keep up with all. And that, to me, that's too much. This was too much from what I could tell. But, doing it this time around, everything's on Disney Plus, so it's kind of fun to be able to catch up with it that way. So there are elements that I enjoyed about it. I think that the piece that that was, I don't know if I liked it or didn't like it, but the Star-Lord character is one that I think is kind of obnoxious anyway. And so when they get to that piece at the end, and I don't know if I'm spoiling this for anybody. I feel like I was the last person to see Avengers Infinity War, so I feel like I'm not spoiling it for anybody. But when you get to that kind of the end of the movie where you think that maybe that Iron Man and the Guardians of the Galaxy and Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, you think that they might be able to defeat Thanos, and they're about to pull the glove off him, right? They're getting the glove, the Infinity Gauntlet off of him, and then you find out that the way he got the Soul Stone was by killing Gamora, and Star-Lord finds out that Gamora's dead, and he starts freaking out, and it's like, it's just like Star-Lord to screw the whole thing up. It's like, keep it together, man. Why is it? It's always Star-Lord who's ruining everything, which is, Chris Pratt does a good job of playing the ruining everything character, right? He's good at that character. You got to hand that to him, right? Whatever you think about Chris Pratt, he knows how to play a good ruining things character. And so that's what you get there, and you get this I don't know, the novelty of bringing in more characters from movies and having them all interact with each other. I thought worked here. It's sort of like with Avengers: Age of Ultron, it was the same characters from the first Avengers movie, but this time they took advantage of the fact that they had created more characters, and that those interactions were a lot of fun. So this movie, it's in the can in 20, or it comes out in April 2018. And I think what you get after this is this phenomenon of what I like to call like this rising tide that rises, that raises all boats. Now, the first movie to come out after this, the first comic book movie to come after this one, is the Deadpool movie, and this one doesn't do as well as you'd think it would. It comes out in May of 2018, so just you think of Avengers Infinity War earning 2.0 not quite 2.05 billion dollars. You need some time in the theater to earn 2 point whatever billion dollars. To earn over $2 billion, you got to really cook for a while. And I think Fox, again, bad decision having Deadpool come out in May of 2018, like less than a month. It's like 3 weeks after Infinity War comes out. Now, it still does pretty well for a movie that only cost $100 million. It almost earns $800 million. It's like 785, which that's not bad. But when you consider the first movie was like 775, and this one, they put more money into it, it should have done better, and it would have done better, I think. Because if you look at July of 2018, Ant-Man and Wasp comes out. That's the best Ant-Man movie that we get out of any of them. It's like 600 million. Venom comes out. Venom is probably a good comp to Deadpool 2, and it earns like 100 million more, or I think maybe like 80 million more at the box office. It's by far the highest earner of, it's 850 million that it earns, by far the highest earner of any of the Sony Spider-Verse movies. And again, I think this is due to this effect. I think Captain Marvel, earning like almost 1.1 billion when it comes out that next year. I think that's again due to this effect, that there's sort of this rising tide, this flood of comic book interest that comes in after the big tidal wave of Avengers Infinity War and lasts through till the pandemic, I would say. The one exception, of course, is Dark Phoenix, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But I think you can look at it from DC as well. DC gets the effect of this. I think they kind of screwed the pooch a bit with the Justice League. $300 million, whenever you make a movie for over 250, it needs to get $1 billion in the theater. It can't do less than $1 billion. It's just the reality when you're spending that kind of money on a film. And Justice League, it's like 600, 660. It barely makes double of its earnings back. Part of that, I think, is Thor Ragnarok. I think Thor Ragnarok does better than any of the other Thor movies, and I think it cuts into a little bit of that, but that can't explain all of it, right? There's too much sauteed and wrong sauce going on there, and I think part of it was that they rushed this Justice League movie. They should have swapped Aquaman and Justice League. Aquaman should have come out first. If they're gonna make a Flash movie, that should come out soon. They could have built this up more. They could have had They could have a standalone Batman movie in there. They rushed this Justice League movie. They hadn't built it up enough, but they wanted it to be the Avengers, and it wasn't the Avengers. Yet December of 2018, right? So December of the same year of the Avengers Infinity War movie, Aquaman becomes the only billion-dollar earner of the DC Extended Universe. And then even like October of 2019, you get that Joker movie, which I think the Joker movie almost could have been a reaction to people being sick of the Marvel movies, that they come to the Joker movie, and that's why that one does so well, that there's almost a hangover effect that happens after the Endgame film. In between there, you've got Shazam, and I think Shazam, for whatever you want to say. I think Shazam, the fact that it does, what is it, 360 million? I think when you compare that to Fury of the Gods, which barely, it didn't even earn 150, it was like 130. I think, again, I think, you can account for that 250 million or 240, whatever the number is, more, we'll call it 200 million more that Shazam, the first Shazam gets versus the second Shazam. I think you can chalk that up to the Infinity War effect. I think that's, I think this tide raises all boats. And I think from Deadpool's standpoint, Deadpool 2's standpoint, I think if they just waited a little bit and released that one a month or two later, I think it would have done much better. And so Fox again screws up. They get their best prize, Deadpool, and they release it too soon in that window of the Infinity War tidal wave that happens there. So that's Infinity War. Now we're in this sort of this 2-year world where comic book movies are printing money for the most part, and that's where we get Ant-Man and Wasp. Ant-Man and Wasp, again, I think, going back to that idea of the early 2000s standalone comic book movie that's just good enough and earns, a couple $100 million. I think Ant-Man is one that would be in that same category, the first Ant-Man movie. And I think Ant-Man and Wasp is a good sequel to it. And, Again, the 600 million that it earns, I think, again, you could give a good 200 million to Infinity War for that. I think you should be looking at this as a 3 or 400 million dollar earner. And I don't know really what you do with that. Because this movie cost 162 million to make. I was trying to think what Quantum Mania, which I haven't seen yet, but that one cost an even 200 million, and it still managed to get like 475 million in the theater. But I think for an Ant-Man movie, if you can get 200, 300 million in the theater, you take that and run. But the problem is, how do you make an Ant-Man movie for, $80 million, right? With all the shrinking and growing and all the different effects that you have to have in an Ant-Man movie, it's hard to pull off. And so this movie was fortunate enough that it had a purpose in sort of getting us from the first Infinity War movie to the second, or the first Avengers Infinity War to the Avengers Endgame. And it works well in that purpose. It really builds Paul Rudd's character. He's somebody that you want to see in these Avengers movies. You have fun watching him interact with Mark Ruffalo and Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. And you get to see more of that here. That's really fun. Obviously, more Michael Douglas, more Evangeline Lilly, Michael Pena. All of that is a lot of fun and something I really enjoyed. And of course, the baddie in this one is really cool too with Ghost. It works as a fun blockbuster kind of movie. I don't know what you do with Ant-Man going forward. I think they fell as much for this as I think the Sony Spider-Verse fell for this, and the DC Extended Universe fell for this bubble, or this rising tide that happens after Infinity War. It gave everybody a false sense of what was possible with these movies, and I think Ant-Man is one of those. That Ant-Man Quantumania, the idea that they're going to introduce their big baddie in Kang in an Ant-Man movie, I think it was, it was based off of what they did in this film, and I think it was a bad idea. They should have looked at that for what it was. But again, I enjoy these movies. I don't, something like a direct to Hulu Ant-Man movie, and then having Paul Rudd play in some of the more ensemble things would be a lot of fun. But again, I don't know how you do an Ant-Man direct to Hulu movie, or direct to Disney Plus movie, or direct to Disney Plus even TV series, and keep it under a low budget when you're not earning that box office. Like an Ant-Man movie has to earn a good amount of money in the theater, and I don't know that the interest is there for that, unfortunately. But this is a fun one. This is a fun one to grab on Disney Plus and enjoy kind of the romp and the chase and all of that stuff that's happening there. So there we go. We've got Ant-Man and Wasp, and then we've got Captain Marvel. So another one of my all-time favorite of these Marvel films. I love this one on a lot of levels. There were some 90s nostalgia moments where you're a little bit like, okay, come on, get over yourself. I think, for example, as someone who in 1995 would have been 16, I remember in my area where I lived, I think maybe they had just opened a Blockbuster, but for the most part, they were still mom and pops. We used to go to our local one, People's Video. There was another one called Video Update, I think, or Weekly Video, or something like that. I can't remember. There were a couple of mom and pops that we would go to for our videos. The chains hadn't really established themselves yet. Blockbuster hadn't really gotten there to where it, by the early 2000s, yeah, Blockbuster kills all the mom and pops. And Blockbuster also isn't really a nostalgia thing. I don't know if the people writing this were more millennials, because millennials, I think, have more nostalgia for Blockbuster because they were younger, and so they don't really remember the mom and pops the same way. So yeah, when she drops from space into the Blockbuster, it's like, come on. It would have been nice if they'd had a mom and pop and they'd given it like a name, like maybe like Steve Ditko's or something. I don't know, something like that. That would have been really cool. But the movie itself does everything I want. It's a 90s blockbuster, right? And it feels like it's in the 90s blockbuster mold. Like, this feels like it could have been an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. I really love that. I love the team up between Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson. I love Brie Larson's take on this character. She does a really fantastic job. I love the messaging in it. This idea of her being gaslit by the superiors in her life, telling her she should not be so emotional, that she needs to control herself and all these things, when she's got this really great power that she can use to sort of defeat all of them and take them all down. And the way that culminates at the very end, where Jude Law's like, don't you want to know if you can beat me without your powers? And she smashes him. And he's like, and she's like, I have nothing to prove to you, which is exactly the moment. That's exactly the point of the film. She has nothing to prove to Jude Law, right? She's more powerful. She's this supreme being in the planet. She has no reason to be, diminishing her powers or being less than who she is, but yet she's diminishing herself to fit in with these Kree people that aren't even her people. And so the fact that she stops trying to just fit in and she smashes them all and destroys them all, it's just absolutely beautiful thing. It's almost like a Carrie moment, right? Where like, you know, the lamb's blood gets dumped on Carrie and then she shuts the door and it's like, oh, it's on now. You know, that stuff at the end when she realizes what's going on with her. It's almost like the same thing. It's almost like the door's shut, and it's like, oh yeah, here we go. Which I absolutely loved all of that. All really worked, and I think, you know, I was reading that a woman who'd written on the comic book, she was called in to consult for making this movie, and I had heard that, like, I guess one of the things was that I guess incels don't like her as a writer because they feel like she has a quote feminist agenda, which I think says more about the incels than people that are actually watching the movie. But one of the things that she did is she felt like for Captain Marvel to work really well in the MCU, she needed to be the perfect mix of Iron Man and Captain America. And that's what we get here. And I think if the plan going forward was maybe to have, you know, maybe to, you know, instead of, you know, Iron Man and Captain America, because they knew they were going to be done at the end of this thing, if the idea was, okay, we'll have Brie Larson's Captain Marvel, we'll have Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther, and we'll have Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Those will be the three that we kind of continue this thing for in phases 4, 5, and 6. You know, if that was the plan to do it, I think they were on the right track with Captain Marvel in this film. I think they'd set her up as the perfect person to kind of play this. I mean, Brie Larson's fantastic in this. I think she does a really great job here. I can also get why incels wouldn't like her, because she doesn't fit like the incels really like this idea of the hot woman who doesn't know she's hot. You know, you'll see them posting on like Reddit and things like that. Like, oh, Janine Garofalo, she's so hot but doesn't know she's hot. It's like, nah, Janine Garofalo knows she's hot. Or was it Margaret Qualley? I think somebody posted that about Margaret Qualley on Instagram, and all the comments were just like, no, Margaret Qualley knows how hot she is. But it's like Brie Larson, you don't say that about Brie Larson, right? Brie Larson knows she's hot. And I think for the incels, they're like, man, I couldn't even talk to Brie Larson. She just wouldn't even want anything to do with me. And they automatically just like, well, no, I don't want anything to do with her. Then, you know, it's like almost like you know, before you can tell me that I suck, I'm just gonna go away or whatever. And I think that's not fair to Brie Larson, because she does really well in this. I really like her here, and I think just because incels don't like her doesn't mean that, you know, people should turn away from a film like this. The other thing too is that I guess because the incels were like bombarding the reviews for this, that Rotten Tomatoes had to change. Did they say tomatoes instead of tomatoes? I don't know where that came from, but anyway, they had to change the way they did reviews, so you couldn't bomb with bad reviews earlier on. You couldn't sort of do that, which, I mean, that was part of the incel approach. They would do that in like video game chat rooms and things like that to try to drown out women video game players, and so this is sort of a thing that they had always been doing. Honestly, you know, if we're looking at why this one was so successful and then the Marvels wasn't, you know, I think there were a lot of things that we could look at for maybe why one worked and the other one didn't. I think the first thing about this one is that this one develops Brie Larson's Captain Marvel completely, right, throughout the movie. This is her story. This is about her coming into her own and being this really great superpower. And then we kind of developed the other two characters in Marvel TV shows that I didn't really even watch. I didn't watch WandaVision, and I didn't watch Ms. Marvel. But the thing, if you look at it from the standpoint of Iron Man and Captain America, they each got 2 movies to develop themselves before they kind of, you know, started doing the more team up things. So, you know, Iron Man, right? You get Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2 where he's really developing himself. And I think if you really were going to make Brie Larson's Captain Marvel, if you were going to make her sort of the next one in that, so maybe she's the Captain America and Spider-Man is the Iron Man, right? And again, unfortunately, Chadwick Boseman passed away, so they had to, you know, they weren't able to kind of have him in one of those parts as well. But you know, if you were going to have her be the Captain America, I think you needed 2 movies, and that second one to really have her kind of, you know, I don't know what the challenge would be. You know, probably have it be another space romp. And I think the other thing too, though, is I think you had to look at this movie, this one that we're talking about here, that I loved so much and I really enjoyed it. The 1.1 billion that it makes is inflated. I think you had to look at this as like maybe another 750, 800 million earner, and then just tack on that extra 300 as the Infinity War effect. I think people knew with that post-credit sequence that she was being teased for this. That beeper that Nick Fury was teasing for this film. It's interesting because I saw this film before I saw Infinity War. So when I saw the beeper at the end, I was like, oh, I know what that's for. I know who he's trying to call there. But yeah, I think, and I think also too, I think there's got to be a way to figure out how you sort of drown out the noise. I think from the millennial or from the incels. I think you've got to you sort of just push past it because not everybody's an incel. Not all incels. Like you don't earn $2 billion with your film just by getting incel money, right? There's more people that are fans, and especially female comic book fans. I think again, the writer who was working on this, there's a whole sort of cohort of female comic book writers and artists who came in the 80s through the Chris Claremont days because he was adding so many great female characters to the X-Men who kind of grew up in that age, and then they're starting to create comics. And a large portion of the audience for this MCU movement were young, for millennial women who were born in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. And I think there's sort of two ways to look at it. It's like, one, yes, you don't want to cater to the incels because, again, you have this large audience that's either both male and just not incels and just don't care about these things like myself, or they're females or female fans who want to see someone like a Captain Marvel and want to see them really perform well. So there's that one part of it. But I think on the other hand, you can't just assume that female audience is going to come out every time you make a Captain Marvel movie. And I think that was maybe the other trap that they fell into, is that when they made the Marvels, I think they thought, well, we're just going to get that audience who came out to see the Captain Marvel movie. They're all going to come out again. They didn't consider the fact that that audience is older now. They're a few years older. Some of them have kids. Some of them, they've got other commitments. There's also the fact too that whereas for me, I looked at the Marvels and said, I don't need to watch all these other things. I'm just going to go watch it and enjoy it. They looked at it from the standpoint of being me now, having seen everything up to the point of these movies, so watching everything in order like this and realizing like, oh, there are things that I missed because I hadn't seen those previous films. Well, they would have already known that going into the Marvels, and they would have looked at it and said, well, I got to catch up on these things. So I'll just catch the Marvels when it's on Disney Plus. I don't need to worry about it. I mean, that's the other thing too, right? Is that Disney Plus is really taking off at that point, whereas in 2019 there really was no Disney Plus. There was no idea that you could potentially watch these movies at home. So there's a lot of miscalculations there, and unfortunately, I don't know what's going to happen to Captain Marvel after the Marvels, because when you look at the movies that they're making here for the MCU, like even the Ant-Man movies, at least make their budget back. In some cases, make double their budget back, or at least a couple $100 million over their budget. The Marvels didn't even make its budget back. I don't know how that happened. I mean, the budget for it was $275 million. And as we see when we start looking at these movies, if you get over $250 million for the budget, it really has to do $1 billion for it to be worth it when you're putting that kind of money in. And Marvel really doesn't have a lot of those lately. Yet they've been putting those kind of money into these movies. And I think they just looked at this period of time between the two Avengers and Infinity War movies. They looked at this period and thought, we're just going to keep printing money. And, if you put $250 million in anything, it's going to come back and give us $1 billion. And it's like almost like this, like an easy way for them to print cash. And I don't think they should have looked at this period of time and understood it better. I mean, I remember from this period of time when Aquaman came out, I remember people going to see Aquaman who normally wouldn't care about a movie like Aquaman. But the comic book buzz was so big at that time that they went and saw Aquaman. And that Aquaman, your $1 billion earner of the DC Extended Universe. So, again, Captain Marvel on its own, it's one of my favorites. So I probably like Winter Soldier, Black Panther, and Captain Marvel. Those are my three favorites, I think, from this initial, first three phases. I think, Deadpool and Wolverine, I think I can put in there somewhere. And of course, I've got to watch so many of the other ones from 4 and 5 that I haven't seen yet. But at least for these first three phases, I think those are my three favorites. And Captain Marvel is just there with that. I absolutely love that. And again, beyond the fact that you've got a strong female lead, which we didn't really see, and we did see Wonder Woman previous to this for DC, but for Marvel, they really weren't doing that kind of thing. It was almost like I think part of the leaked emails from Sony, Ike Perlmutter, who had a large say in how Marvel was going until Kevin Feige was eventually able to take over from him, and he had no input anymore. But he was using the Elektra and Catwoman movies as a way to say, like, we shouldn't have female-centered films, and it took some work to kind of get out from under that. But this one does it. This one works. And I have seen, when I look on Letterboxd, you see a lot of fluctuation in the reviews. And I don't think all the 2-star reviews are people who are just incels. I don't think that's it. I think this movie doesn't always land for everybody, but for me, yeah, this one's one of my favorites. All right, so now we've gotten ourselves back, right? We just did Captain Marvel, so it is now time for Avengers Endgame. April of 2019, so now Matt is turning 40. And again, I think, talking about Captain Marvel also getting the bump from Avengers Endgame, it's almost like an amuse-bouche to Endgame, because it comes out in March of 2019, and then Endgame is April of 2019. And, I don't know. For me, with this movie, I definitely had some problems with it. But, having rocked with this thing all the way through, right? So what is that now? 22 movies? This is like the 23rd of 22 movies, I think or 20, yes, 23rd of 23 movies is it. And is that what it is? Or no, sorry, it's the 22nd movie, right? Because the Spider-Man movie comes after. That's the 23rd, right? So this is the 22nd movie in this phase of films, and I'd really come to know and appreciate these characters. And I will say, when it got to the end and that you bring everybody out, I was a little bit emotional. I don't know about the actual tears dropping, but a little misty, a little lump in the throat. It was working for me there, and so I had to admit that. I had to come, accept that as for myself, that the movie was that good. But it definitely has some issues that I want to discuss as well. I think, the time travel thing, that's something that I saw people talk about, and I think they admitted themselves that they had painted themselves into a corner by making Thanos so strong that they had to do this whole time travel thing to get their way out of what they had done. In the comic books, if I remember, there wasn't like this 5-year period from when Thanos snaps his fingers and half the people die, and then they solve all the issues. The other thing in the comics that I love is, I want to say that Nebula played a part, because Nebula is very different in the comics than she is in the movie, right? She's not this cyborg thing that she is in the movies. She's more, I think she's like a blue version of Gamma or Gamora. And so, I don't know if, I guess maybe they thought it would be too fanboy-y to have two women with, a green woman and a blue woman that wear hot outfits. If they thought that would be too much, they made Nebula into more of this like robot kind of character. But she plays a part in in that, and also Silver Surfer, who they didn't have, right? They, which I think that was one of the reasons why I wasn't a fan of the Infinity War. It was just like, well, you can't make these without Silver Surfer, right? You should have just waited, and I think had they known, especially Feige, if he had known how quickly they were going to turn around and purchase Fox and get the rights back to Silver Surfer, maybe they put him in. But I think also too, Disney was pushing for all this stuff to get done quicker and have it done sooner. So, anyway, so the time travel thing, I think it's contrived for sure, and it's a way for them to kind of write themselves out of the corner they had painted themselves into. But by the same token, I also liked it as like this sort of greatest hits kind of thing. Like you could almost, each of these sequences that they go through where they're trying to get these gems back, you could almost play Sarah McLachlan's I Will Remember You, right, in the background, as it's like, oh, remember this sequence, I remember this from before. It's like, oh, it's the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy, and here's Don Cheadle and Nebula, Karen Gillan, they're trying to stop him from getting the Infinity Stone so they can get it themselves, and you're seeing all these things that you remember from the earlier films, which again, for me, having only seen a couple of those earlier films before I watched Infinity War, I didn't always get all of them, but I knew what they were doing, right? I knew they were referencing previous movies that I was seeing there. So I kind of liked that. For this last movie to sort of be the end of the whole thing, why not come up with some way to reflect on all of the things that happened? So I appreciated that. The biggest beef I have with this is when Black Widow dies. And again, hopefully I'm not spoiling anything for anybody, but I think it's the worst thing about this movie because, and I think I disliked it even more now than I did when I saw it the first time when I hadn't seen all the other movies. Because now it's like I've kind of grown to know Black Widow's character through all of these things. She's been in so many of the movies and played such pivotal roles in so many of them, especially some of the biggest ones like Captain America, Winter Soldier. So she's played this big part in a lot of these movies, and to not have her there in that big finale when everybody's there fighting against Thanos and his baddies, that just to me seemed like a really bad move. And I don't know. I think there's ways that you could have written around that really easily. I mean, the easiest right around for that. So just to give people an idea, I just spoiled it for you if you don't know. So, but maybe I should talk through it where they're going to get the Soul Stone, and one of them has to die for the other one to get it, and there's sort of a sacrifice off, right, between Hawkeye and Black Widow, where they're both trying to see who can out-sacrifice the other and give their life, and Black Widow's the one who wins. And I think the easiest right around for that is that they both go, right? They hold hands together and they both jump down and they say, you know what, we're not going to, one of us will survive, one of us will die, whoever dies first, right? Maybe that's what, maybe the Red Skull who's there manning the stone, maybe he can even tell them like, hey, you could both fall, and whoever dies first, the other one will get it. And maybe when they do it, right, it sort of enacts this clause, right? It says, oh, the Soul Stone decided you both get it, because you both sacrificed, the whole point was the sacrificing. It wasn't about somebody having to die, but rather the giving a soul for a soul. And since you both offered your souls the way you did, we'll give the soul. That's like the easiest thing to do, right? Or you could come up with a more complicated thing where the two of them somehow trick the Red Skull and they trick the stone, and that's how they get it, right? Maybe one of them pretends to die, or maybe they, she does the time travel thing right before, or whatever, you could have written your way out of that and found a way to get Black Widow there at the end of the movie. Now, if the idea is, part of the idea for me was when I first saw it, I'd heard that they were going to make a Black Widow movie, but I wasn't sure. And I thought maybe she just wanted out of all this stuff. And she was like, okay, you get one more movie out of me, but otherwise I'm done with this. And that's why they killed her character off. But that wasn't the place to kill her. That wasn't the place to do it. It just didn't work for me with the rest of the movie. And I think they could have written their way out of it very easily. I think for fans of the movie, I don't think fans of the movie, yes, clickbaity articles after the fact with these clickbaity titles of 5 issues with Infinity War or Endgame or whatever, they might have said yeah, it's hokey that Hawkeye and Black Widow sacrificed themselves together, and that's how they did it. That they might have said that's hokey. I would have loved it. It would have worked well for me. But I think the number one thing is that Black Widow needed to be there in that end sequence, and she wasn't. And the fact that she wasn't, I think, was a really big mistake on their part, and something that it really hurts the overall quality of the film for me. But this is it. This is that kind of the end of this thing. And yes, I know the Spider-Man movie that we're going to talk about in a minute is still part of this phase. It's the last film in this phase. But I think there is definitely some things about this that are worth discussing here in terms of just sort of the overall legacy of this thing. The first one is that with these comic book series, and I think really with any kind of franchise, you almost never get to you almost never get to finish it the way you want to finish it. So the fact that Kevin Feige and company were able to put together a 22-film movie arc and finish it the way they wanted to finish it, that there was no hiccup along the way that hurt things such that they either had to, not even change course, but they had to scrap the whole thing and reboot it, right? Because that's usually what happens. I was trying to think of what movie series really were able to finish like that. I think you could say that the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, right? He could end that one the way he wanted to end it, but that's only 3 movies, right? He's getting in and out on 3 movies. The Spider-Man, for example, the Spider-Man trilogy. Let's look at that one with Sam Raimi's. That wasn't supposed to be a trilogy. He was planning to make a 4th movie. The problem was he was taking too long making the 4th movie. Sony wanted it out sooner. And Sam Raimi was like, well, I'm not going to be able to make the movie that you need me to make if we rush it. So they said, fine, we're going to reboot it with Andrew Garfield. And that's what they did. And then, get the 2 Andrew Garfield movies. And they were planning to do a 3rd one of those. And then they decide, oh, you know what, we're going to work with Marvel and reboot, just do a new version of Spider-Man there. And that's what you get there. Superman, right? You get the first two Superman movies. Third movie doesn't do well, and then the fourth movie is that the canon debacle. I mean, so obviously that's not ending the way they want to end it. The Batman movies, you think of the Batman Forever. I mean, if Batman and Robin. I mean, if Batman Forever and Batman and Robin do better, especially Batman and Robin, they're probably making fifth and sixth movies. But no, Batman and Robin was so bad that they took it from them. You have the Blade movies, right? With the first three movies go really well. The third one's not that good, and that's it for Blade. It's done. So it's not common. The DC Extended Universe, right? That's a big one that James Gunn has to come in and kind of reboot the whole thing. They never get to finish that, do that what they wanted to do with that. So the fact that Kevin Feige and company were able to put together something that spanned 22 movies over what it started in 09. It's over 10. No, what was it? 06. It was like a 13-year span of these movies, and yes, there were some that were better than others, but I don't think there's any real duds in there. I mean, even that second Hulk movie that gets that kind of does the worst out of those, it's not that horrible. But so the fact that you could pull this off over 22 movies and end it the way you want to end it, even if I disagree with certain points of it, it's an amazing feat. And I don't think it's something we're ever going to see again. For example, what we're seeing here now with phases 4, 5, and 6, it's not anywhere near that successful. And I don't know that maybe these two Avengers movies that they want coming out at the end of this phase 6. Maybe they're $2 billion earners. I doubt it. I don't think we're going to get back to that height either. So again, to have 4 movies with these 4 team-ups, these 4 Avengers movies, each of them earn over $1 billion, but have the last two over $2 billion, and that the last of them all, $2.7 billion. It's amazing. I mean, first of all, to be able to get people to rock with you for that long, to the point that they feel so invested that they've got to do that last movie in the theater and make it happen, is just an astounding feat in and of itself. And I think as much as that was an astounding feat, I don't think that they understood how astounding a feat it was. Maybe Kevin Feige did, maybe Disney didn't, and Disney kept thinking about, we've got to keep printing money with these. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Well, maybe why don't we do this? Why don't we put a pin in the legacy piece of this? Let's do the Spider-Man movie, and then we'll kind of come back to it. But it's one of those things. Once you start talking about it, Endgame, you want to just start talking about the whole thing. So let's get into this last Spider-Man movie, and then maybe we can save a piece for the overall legacy. So we get the Spider-Man movie, Far From Home. It comes out in July of 2019. Now, in between Spider-Man Far From Home and Avengers Endgame. And again, Endgame wasn't out that long when Spider-Man Far From Home comes out. Spider-Man Far From Home comes out in July of 2019. So it's not even 2 months after Endgame comes out. So it's almost like you're seeing both of them at the theater at the same time, which was an interesting decision because the movie does well enough, right? It really does that makes its money. It's almost like they were still riding the wave from that. Now, in between, you have the Dark Phoenix movie. And that movie does horribly, right? Out of all of these live action comic book movies from this period of time, Dark Phoenix is by far the worst, right? It cracks like 250 million. That's all it does. And that was right after the Disney purchase of Fox, and they just killed it. They wanted nothing to do with Dark Phoenix. They had their own release schedule planned. They had Endgame and Far From Home. They didn't really have any place for Dark Phoenix. And so that's probably why it does that badly. But I think even if Fox hadn't bought Disney, or Disney hadn't bought Fox, I don't think that movie does well. I mean, maybe 400 or 500 million, right? Like, I don't think it's going to do that much better based off of what Marvel was doing at that time. The other thing about that Dark Phoenix movie is it was supposed to be a team up with the Fantastic Four film. So they are going back to 2016, right, where they've got the Fantastic Four movie that's a complete dud, and they've got the Apocalypse movie that doesn't do so well. And in between, they've got Deadpool. And it's like they were planning a team up on either side of Deadpool, right? They were planning a team up with the X-Men and Fantastic Four without Deadpool involved at all. So that just sounds sauteed in wrong sauce as it is, but they had to kind of scramble with Dark Phoenix when they realized how bad that Fantastic Four was, and they weren't going to make any more Fantastic Four movies because they couldn't do that team up that they wanted to do there. So it's another piece of that doesn't work. But 5 years later, 2024, Disney kind of finally comes to terms with those Fox movies and really gives them the appreciation they deserve. But in 2019, yeah, Dark Phoenix, it just gets, Disney kind of buries it because it was sort of inconvenient for them at that time. They just purchased Fox, and they kind of wanted to. They didn't really have interest in pushing Marvel or mutant movies. And I think the other thing too is I think one of the issues with the Marvels is that they were planning to introduce the mutants on their own, the own way that they wanted to do it. And when that movie did so poorly, they realized they had to scrap it and just kind of, use those Fox mutants, use Deadpool and Wolverine to kind of introduce mutants into the to the MCU, and which was a smart move. It ended up working that way, but I think they had their own plan that they wanted to do for it. And I think again that this I think Avengers Endgame gives them a false sense of what's possible and how good they are at doing this kind of thing, which I definitely agree with them. They should think that, so based on how good that was. But anyway, okay, so we are in Far From Home. Comes out 2 months after Endgame, and it is the second Spider-Man movie, and we get Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. And of course, we also get Nick Fury, right? Samuel L. Jackson is back as Nick Fury, and I think as a second Spider-Man movie, it's pretty good. I like the idea that Spider-Man's kind of tired of being Spider-Man, but he doesn't really have any choice. He's got to fight. He's got to attack this thing. I mean, he's fighting against these big elemental monsters. I was wondering how Mysterio was going to play a part in this because I think they did a really good job of not making it seem like he was a bad guy in the commercials. They kept it really good. I know he was a bad guy from the comics. I know what kind of bad guy he is from the comics. But I mean, they made it look like he's a wizard or like a sorcerer, like Doctor Strange. That's kind of how they make him look. And then you find out he's Mysterio, right? He uses illusions and all of that. And Jake Gyllenhaal is really fantastic in that. And so that really worked there. And I think again, you're building Tom Holland to be someone who's going to take over for Iron Man. And they keep throughout the movie, they've got imagery of Robert Downey Jr. And there's this idea of like him bequeathing certain things to him and whether he's ready for these things or not. But yeah, I think he's seeming like he's ready. And of course, they're setting the stage with this one for what the next one's going to be, which is the one that again is almost Marvel's third $2 billion earner, right? And that third Spider-Man movie pulls in up $1.9 billion. I think again with that third Spider-Man movie, I think it's not so much the movie, but it was the environment at that time. That was late 2021. Things were just starting to open back up from the pandemic, and people really wanted to go see a movie again. And Spider-Man was that movie for them to see. So I think that's something it's worth considering when you think about how successful these movies are and what that next Spider-Man movie could potentially do. I think $1.9 billion might be too much for that next Spider-Man movie, but and again, I think with this movie here, it comes out at the right time. It's able to follow the wave, kind of ride the wave of the Endgame movie and do enough for it. So I really I really enjoyed it. I don't know. I think I like the other one better than this one. I like the previous one better than this one, but I really like Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio. He's really great baddie. I'd love to see him team up with Michael Keaton's Vulture in a future movie. I think they'd be a lot of fun together. So that part of it worked, but I think comparing to those first 3 Spider-Man movies, I don't know how much that does there. But anyway, so why don't we do this? We'll take one last break here, and then we come back. I'm just going to give my final thoughts on this thing. I know I was giving some final thoughts to begin with, but yeah, why don't we take a quick break here? You can hear about another one of my books, and I'll be right back. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and we're going to wrap up this discussion of MCU Phase 3. So in the previous segment, I did talk a little bit about the legacy of this 3-phase movie cycle here, 23 movie cycle. And, I think the biggest thing, again, is the fact that they pulled it off, right? That they were able to make this work. And I was trying to think of another one. You can't think of one this big, right? Because obviously the Fast and the Furious is working. They're kind of making it work. I think with the Mission Impossible series, there's been some ebbs and flows with that. But really, this MCU thing is just insane that they were able to do it. And I do think part of the legacy is not just the fact that they pulled it off, but I wonder if they needed to sit back and think about the fact that they pulled it off a little bit more. And instead, right, they go right from Endgame into the second Spider-Man movie, which is almost like an epilogue. It's an epilogue, but also a bridge into this next phase of movies, right? When they go into the multiverse saga. So they don't really give themselves a chance to sort of sit back and understand what they did here or what they pulled off. It's almost like we're going to pull it off again. We're just going to move into the next one. It's almost like we're not done pulling it off, right? We're pulling off the next thing. And I do think that was a little bit of hubris on their part, and I think that's what sort of informs what the next few years are going to be like. We could also talk about the pandemic. The pandemic, I think, also really kind of puts a good buttoner on this thing. And I think you can explain a lot of sort of the issues that not just Marvel has, but comic book movies in general have as we get into 2020, 2021, 22, and where we're at now. That, for sure, the pandemic definitely plays a part in that. The fact that you can't go into the theater and see these movies, because that's the whole thing, is that these movies are supposed to be theatrically released phenomenon that just kind of sort of transcend, I don't know if transcend, but there's such a massive piece of the zeitgeist, and suddenly that element is gone. Obviously the box office rakes aren't there, but also the zeitgeist phenomenon isn't there to the same level. So yes, the pandemic definitely played a part in it, but I think also one of the big things in 2019 that I know for that time, I was just getting back into podcasting myself in 2019. And I was doing some podcasts and talking about some of these things. And of course, at that time, I hadn't seen the Avengers, or these two Avengers movies. I hadn't really seen them. I think I'd made the Grimace joke in one of those, not knowing that Star-Lord also made the Grimace joke. But I'd made that comment. I also hadn't fine-tuned the Grimace joke to it being Grimace's MAGA Uncle Thanos, because I think I don't think I fully realized just how much he was a MAGA uncle. But anyway, one of the things I talked about was the phenomena of the Joker film that comes out late in 2019. That Joker film is what's $50 million and pulls in a billion at the time. And I felt like at that time, that Joker movie was a reaction to the bigness and the over-the-topness of the MCU. That this was sort of people, I don't want to say it was a backlash, but I think it was people saying, I want something different now. Okay, we've done it. Okay, fine. I got to the theater. I watched your 3-hour behemoth of a film, Avengers Endgame. Now I want something new. And here is this Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie that is something new. And I appreciate it. And I'm going to see it. I'm going to support it. And I'm going to love it. And I wonder if, whether it was the DC Extended Universe people who were still trying to pump films out, or Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the Sony Spider-Verse, or any of them, if they really looked at what the Joker meant for all of them. And I think they should have seen it as the bubble bursting there. They should have seen it as the wave had crested. But there are some things, of course, that happen between then and now that, again, create these false hopes, or these, I don't know, maybe not false hope, but so much as like a false positive or a false sense of how good things are. So when we get into the pandemic era, right, and in 2020, that's when Disney Plus is launched, and you get, there's shows like WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, and Loki, and especially the first and third of those were really well received, right? WandaVision was treated as like prestige TV. It was treated the way people really like The Mandalorian. I remember on Twitter, everybody was talking about WandaVision. You got to watch WandaVision, get to see WandaVision, all of that. I didn't have Disney Plus at the time, so it wasn't a possibility. It wasn't until I linked my ESPN Plus account and my Hulu account and realized that Disney was included by having those two linked, that suddenly we had Disney Plus. It's like we have Disney Plus because we have Hulu and we have ESPN Plus. That's really why we have it. But that those shows were there. So I haven't seen any of those shows, but that was a piece of it, right? Is that people were really liking those shows, and I think there was a sense of like, okay, this MCU thing is just going to keep plugging along, right? And it's just going to be an even bigger juggernaut as we go. The first movie that they released was the Black Widow one, and it was like a combination Disney Plus and theatrical release, and it kind of makes the box office tank a fair amount. I mean, it only makes like 300 million in there, and I think Scarlett Johansson ends up suing them over that. She wasn't a fan because it hurt her ability to make money from the gate there that she was supposed to earn there. But DC's doing the same thing. They do the same thing with Wonder Woman. They do with some of their other ones. They release them on Max the same time they're releasing the theater, so the theatrical gate isn't as good. And I think the thinking that they thought they were going to have there is that, well, we get that at that, maybe we don't make the gate on those movies, but what we get on the other side is this passive, continual income from the subscriber base, right? If somebody new signs up for Max at $10 a month, and we get them giving us $120 a year over 5 years, that's going to be more money than one ticket to go see Wonder Woman. Which is, it does make sense, right? It would work in theory, but I think the problem was, one, a lot of people already had Max, just like a lot of people already had Disney Plus, and so having the movies on those things, it didn't help them there. But the other thing it does is it cannibalizes the audience, because unless the movie's really good, you're going to start making those decisions about how much do I really need to see this in the theater. And I think that was another piece where Disney Plus kind of cannibalized their audience, because for a lot of the movies that were coming out in these later phases, there wasn't the impetus to go see them in the theater. Why don't I just watch them on Disney Plus? I think also that the decisions that they were making about what movies they were making, the Eternals, another Ant-Man and Wasp movie, obviously the Guardians of the Galaxy, those ones. I mean, the third Guardian of the Galaxy movie, it does okay. It does well, right? It goes like 850 million in the box office, but it also had a $250 million budget. That should have been the Guardian of the Galaxy's $1 billion earner, right? If you look at it, the third movie for the big ones usually is the big earner, right? Iron Man, that's Iron Man's $1 billion earner. That's Captain America's $1 billion earner is the third one. That was Spider-Man. I don't know what whatever the third Spider-Man movie is that did 1.9 billion. Right, that's the biggest earner is the third one. So for Guardians of the Galaxy, it was the biggest earner, but it didn't earn as much as they thought. And so they had to know, kind of as that year was going on, as 2023 was going on, that they were in trouble. And of course, it ends up being ultimately, the worst part comes with the Marvels. But it was something that was building before that. You could see it building kind of, 2021, 2022 into 2023. That was happening. It was coming. And they had a couple of bright spots in there that I think led them to believe that it wasn't going to be so bad. You get that Spider-Man movie that does 1.9 billion in the theater at the end of 2021. I don't think they understood fully just how much that was just people wanting to get out into the theater again. It was later in 2021, so the vaccine was fully in effect at that point. People were really starting to feel safe going out, not wearing masks all the time, all of that kind of thing. And that Spider-Man movie was the one that everybody gravitated towards and did. And then, of course, you get a little bit of a follow-up bump when you get into the Doctor Strange movie. That one almost pulls $1 billion as well. And I think Marvel thought, okay, we're back on track again. And then 2023 comes, and it's not good for them. And I think the biggest legacy of the Infinity War saga, the first three phases of the MCU, the biggest legacy is that it's almost like it took the air out of it somewhat. That it was so big and so massive and such a phenomenon that people were exhausted after the fact. And there was a little bit of a bump due to COVID, like okay, let's get back in and start doing some of these movies. I think last year was a smart move on their part to whittle things down to one movie and have it be a nostalgia fest that was fantastic in Deadpool and Wolverine, where it's suddenly, okay, Marvel's back in again. But, this year, I don't know, we'll see what happens this year. But I think this year they're going back to the well of properties that aren't as big as some of the other ones. And so, yes, you want to see them grow, for example, grow Sam Wilson as Captain America and have that be big. But again, you can't afford to have Sam Wilson's Captain America film grow when you're starting off the bat with, what was that budget? It was like over 200 million, right? I think was that one. It's 180, but I see it says 180. I think there were cost overruns there that aren't included in the regular budget. I was reading that they needed to pull at least over 400 million just to make any kind of profit on that one. And I feel like that's too much to put on Sam Wilson's Captain America movie. He needs to be able to have a couple movies to build into that $1 billion earner. You can't just expect him to come out of the gate like that. And so I think you dial that down to $100 million film and hope it makes 500 or 600 million. That would have been a better bet. But they're not in the business of doing that anymore. These movies are bigger, and they're all expecting to make a billion in the theater. You just can't. You had that time with those two Avengers movies, but I think they don't understand to the point now that I don't want to say it that like the bubble has burst, right? But I think you can also say the air has just sort of been sucked out of that thing, and people are exhausted and they don't have the energy for it anymore. I think you can also make the point that a lot of those fans were younger as you're kind of building into that. So, like for example, if you were born in 1990, right, you're 29 in 2019 when Avengers Endgame comes out. So let's say now it's the pandemic, but 29, 30, 31, you get married and you have kids in 2021. And so you've got one kid, maybe you have another one in 2023. Now you've got two kids in 2023, a 1-year-old, or sorry, a 2-year-old and an infant, and you got to find a babysitter to be able to take care of these kids. And finding a babysitter for two infants, maybe one of your parents can help with that, but it's not easy to pull that off. So you're looking at what movies in 2023 you can go see. So you got Ant-Man, you got Guardians of the Galaxy, you got the Marvels. I mean, out of those three, what are you thinking? You and your spouse. Probably Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Because that's the one you're most invested in. That's the one you watch the other two movies and you want to see what this thing looks like at the end. But even then, are you even going to see that one? Or are you saying, you know what, we can't even do Guardians of the Galaxy? Like by the time, maybe you plan it. Okay, so the movie comes out, May of 2023. So here you are, second week of May 2023. You're getting ready to go see the movie, and the baby is spitting up or whatever, and it's like, okay, you know what, you had to call off the babysitter. Sorry, we don't need you to. We can't go, and that's it. You're not going to the movie. And it's probably also easier with a movie to say no, I'm not going to go, than it would be like, say, a concert or a sporting event where you've bought the ticket for that specific event and you really can't do anything with it. With the movie, right? You haven't even bought the ticket yet. Right, you're planning on what time you want to go. You figure you're going to go at this time, but you're going to buy the ticket when you get there. So now you're not out any money either. In fact, you're saving money by not going. And so I think that's hurting them as well. I think one movie a year might be the way to do it, but they're going back to 3 this year, and it's going to be interesting to see what the turnaround is going to be on these things. I think we'll see what happens with Brave New World on its second weekend, but. I think that's the other legacy, though, of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is that they pushed it too much, that they flew too close to the sun. They made it. They landed that plane. They got it to work for that one time, but it wasn't enough. One time wasn't enough. They had to go through and do another one. And so that's another piece. I don't think they understood how much of a unicorn it was that they pulled it off the first time. I don't think they quite got it, and I don't know what's going to happen with these new ones that they're doing with Robert Downey Jr. I think they're hoping with Robert Downey Jr. involved that they're going to hedge against any kind of real big losses. And again, last year's Deadpool and Wolverine showed that you can still have a good-sized earner from one of these movies, that it's still there, it's still a possibility. But yeah, I don't know. I think the legacy of the first three phases of the Infinity Saga is that it's something that was amazing, that they pulled it off, and probably isn't going to happen again. And so, I guess as fans of comic book movies, I don't know what's going to happen with this genre. As somebody who loved comic books, but maybe not so much the comic book movies themselves, I was excited to see all the things that are happening. And I think there's certain things I'm still going to be excited about. I want to see the new Daredevil show. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I probably want to catch up on some of the things that I've fallen behind on. I do want to see WandaVision at some point and see what that's like now that I've kind of made it through this phase of the MCU, and now I'm on to phase 4. Yeah, I kind of want to see WandaVision and see what it's all about. But I don't have time to really sift through all of that MCU, and I don't know if they're ever going to fully dial it back the way that it was, where maybe that's what it needs to be, right? Maybe you need to strip it down to 2 movies a year and maybe 2 TV shows a year, and that's all you do. But I also know too that, like, when you have so many comic book characters, how do you do that when you have so many of them and not have them all featured in things? And I don't know. I guess you just got to have them and have a couple of big ones and have it go from there. But I think what we saw in that 13-year period with those 23 films is probably something we'll never see again. And to be honest, I'm kind of okay with it. I'm kind of okay with us never seeing it again. I think seeing it once was enough. I think the fact that Disney's trying to replicate it again, because why wouldn't Disney try to replicate it again? It was printing money, for that time period. That especially that period in 2018 and 2019, the money they were making off those movies was insane. And so of course they want to try to make that kind of money again. They want to see it happen again. I don't know. I don't know. I think I don't know. I don't know what'll happen there. We'll see. We'll have to see. But yeah, this was a fun trip for me. It was a fun ride to kind of go through these like this, especially as a comic book fan, to finally sit down in earnest. Starting with the first phase of the MCU, second, and then finishing off this third one here. It was a fun project. One of the things I remember when Endgame came out, there was a Coolidge Corner Theater in Massachusetts. I think it's in Brookline. It's not in Boston, but it's essentially, if you went to Boston, you'd think it was Boston. That's how Boston is. There's like satellite towns around it that feel like Boston, but it's not. But anyway, they did. I think it was them that did this marathon where they did all 22 movies back to back. And I guess they had like showers set up and things like that. And so this radio station I listened to, is a sports radio station in Boston. They sent one of their interns to do it. He had to sit through them all 22, or I guess it was 21, right, going into the 22 of Avengers Endgame. And so I can't imagine doing that, because I will say, for me, spreading this out over the course of a year and watching them all over the course of the year was a bit exhausting. Again, it's another piece of this for their legacies. They made really great movies, but these movies can be a chore, especially for someone my age who likes to watch a lot of 90-minute PM entertainment blasts. I had 2 hours comic book movie, 2.5 hour comic book movie, 3 hours. It can be too much, even as a comic book geek like I was, for sure. But this was a fun ride. I'm kind of glad, and fun we were able to kind of wrap it up this way, with this one-off episode that looked at the movies from this third phase here. But thank you for listening here. Why don't we wrap up? Again, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's where you can find the site, links to the podcast, all of my reviews. My latest book is Nadia and Aiden. Definitely please pick that up. Link to in the description. We'll tell you where you can find that. $10.99 I think it is, or maybe I don't know what it is. $10.99 maybe, $12.99, something like that on Amazon for paperback, but also you can get it in Kindle for $3.99. Either way, I always appreciate if somebody wants to pick that up. But yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.
Direct to video,